Is it possible to eradicate evil? What is it, and where does it come from? These questions have preoccupied humanity for centuries, with different answers emerging each time. The nature of evil, its boundaries, its absoluteness and relativity, and the struggle against it. This video explores how humanity has reflected on these issues and where these reflections have led. The beautiful idea of a grand and total victory over evil, which is supposed to mark the culmination of the historical process, is a leitmotif in many religions. For instance, according to Christian eschatology, the Last Judgment will occur at the end of time, after which the kingdom of heaven will extend across the entire world created by God, and those who enter it will dwell in eternal grace. Echoes of such ideas can be heard in non-religious political concepts as well, where the end of history is associated with the elimination of the source of suffering. Utopians imagined it possible to create an ideal society free of inequality, where goods are distributed rationally among citizens, for example, as depicted in the fictional island of Utopia described by the humanist Thomas More. Marx and Engels argued that ultimate happiness would arrive after the triumph of communism. At the same time, injustice and evil serve as drivers of struggle and fuel for any political or social movement. Otherwise, humanity would find itself in the position of the righteous from Thomas Aquinas's Summa Theologiae, who must gaze from paradise upon the punishment of sinners in hell to cope with the burden of blissful inaction. How did theologians and philosophers interpret the problem of evil? And what array of opinions on this phenomenon have we accumulated to this day? Evil and theology. One of the key canonical problems historically developed by theologians of various world religions boils down to a simple, even somewhat naive question. Why does God allow evil? This can be examined from the perspective of morality, as well as through the lens of logic and ontology. After all, if the absolute is inherently all good and all-powerful, where do cruelty, crime, disease, and so forth come from? Does this mean that evil is permitted deliberately? Such questions are explored by theodicy, the doctrine of justifying God, and various thinkers have proposed their solutions to this paradox, though many boil down to a few key arguments. The first dialectician, Heraclitus, suggested that human perception is limited, and we are unable to grasp all causes and effects. Consequently, what seems bad to us may be necessary for the universe. This motif, that humans see only part of the picture, which leads to perceptions of injustice and evil, recurs in many theodicies. A similar approach is found in Eastern religious systems. For instance, in Advaita Vedanta, it is said that only an unenlightened consciousness, one that has not attained an understanding of non-duality, perceives something as evil. The theodicy of privation is formulated as follows: evil has no independent existence and is merely a lack of good. From this perspective, it appears as a kind of black hole amidst a benevolent cosmos, or a dark corner of the universe untouched by divine light. In Plotinus's view, creation arises through the emanation of the One, its radiation beyond itself, meaning all that exists partakes in this good. However, the farther something is from its source, the more non-goodness is present in matter. Thomas Aquinas shared this view, asserting that evil represents a lesser degree of goodness and possesses neither perfection nor being. For this reason, the devil cannot create but can only distort what exists. Blessed Augustine also interpreted the category in question in the spirit of Neoplatonism, which, however, posed a problem for the thinker. How can a person choose the dark side if the object of choice, as it were, does not exist? What is the secret of evil's allure if it is merely a lesser concentration of good? Augustine, before his conversion to God, committed many unrighteous acts, and his own sinfulness weighed on him throughout his life. In his Confessions, he describes an episode from his youth. Not far from our vineyard there grew a pear tree, laden with fruit that was quite ordinary in both appearance and taste. So we, depraved youths, set out in the dead of night, that's how late our street games went on, to shake it down and collect our spoils. We carried off a great load, not to eat, we were ready to throw it all to the pigs. but for the sake of committing an act that was sweet to us only because it was forbidden. Later, Augustine concludes that the source of evil lies within the human being. God granted us free will, and we misuse this gift for wicked purposes, showing weakness by turning away from grace. Thus, evil is explained by freedom of choice. Plato had already depicted the human soul as a chariot harnessed to two horses pulling in opposite directions, a noble white horse and a malevolent black one. The charioteer, the rational principle, is free to choose which to indulge. In Christian dogma, evil is explained by original sin. A mistake once made left an imprint on our nature, which partook of the tree of knowledge, granting humans the ability to act unrighteously. Thomas Aquinas notes that a world in which humans could not choose would be imperfect, but this is no excuse for breaking commandments. Aquinas' final argument leads to the following conclusion. Existence itself, as it is, presupposes the presence of evil. This idea was most fully articulated by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz in his treatise Essays on Theodicy. In his view, the entire phenomenal universe consists of indivisible elements, monads, the primary one being the creative God. In the process of creation, he arranged these building blocks of existence in a specific way. However, all substances, except the demiurge himself, are imperfect to the same degree that they are unique. A monad as perfect as the primary one cannot exist. Nevertheless, he chose the only correct configuration. Thus, evil is part of the overall picture created by the all-good God, who fashioned the best of all possible worlds. Voltaire mocks the defenders of such ideas. In his work, Candide or Optimism, he puts the phrase, "all is for the best in this world," into the mouth of the sage Pangloss, who teaches the titular hero metaphysico-theologico-cosmolo-nigology. Even after losing his possessions, nearly being hanged, suffering from advanced syphilis, and surviving a shipwreck, the crooked philosopher continues to insist that the world is arranged in the best possible way. "It is proven," said Pangloss, "that things are as they must be. Since everything is created for a purpose, everything is necessarily created for the best purpose." Notice, noses were made for spectacles, so we wear spectacles. Legs were clearly meant to be shod, so we wear shoes. Stones were created to be hewn and used to build castles, so my lord has the finest castle. The noblest baron in the land must have the best dwelling. Pigs were made to be eaten, so we eat pork year-round. Therefore, those who say everything is good are speaking nonsense. It must be said that everything is for the best. The hero's ship encounters a storm near the port of Lisbon and is wrecked. This episode reflects real events. The 1755 earthquake that reduced the Portuguese capital to ruins. The horrific natural disaster shocked contemporaries and forced many to reconsider their views on the just and benevolent structure of the world. Voltaire himself, under the impression of Lisbon's destruction and the horrors of the catastrophe, wrote a poem containing these lines: "O eternal pity, tearful memory, deceived sage, you cry, all is useful. Come, behold this devastated city, this wretched dust of fathers, wives, and children." The deceived sage is another incorrigible optimist of the era, the poet Alexander Pope, who, guided by the same principles of theodicy as Leibniz, wrote in his essay on man, "In discord, harmony, unseen by earth, universal good in partial evil lies, so yield, give honor to creation's worth. Truly, all that is good." However, Voltaire's relationship with evil, as with God, remained contradictory. The caustic Frenchman scoffed at those whom even clear signs of the world's injustice could not shake in their belief in the perfection of the divine plan. Yet he also penned lines expressing what today might be called acceptance. "To you and you alone, absolute Lord of nature, I owe everything. You granted me the ability to feel and think, just as you granted me the ability to digest food and walk. I thank you for this and do not pry into your secret." Transformations of evil. Starting from the modern era and throughout subsequent periods, the concept of evil undergoes radical change and branches out. In Kant's teachings, the issue of morality undergoes a transformation similar to other philosophical questions. The thinker effects a radical shift in defining the relationship between the human and reality. Whereas previously, the sources of all judgments were considered external metaphysical principles embedded in the firmware of the universe, now they originate from the subject itself. Since the moral law is a product of reason, evil is a deviation from it, made possible by free will. Thus, its source lies within human nature. In Kant's conception, there is no evil without benefit. For example, aesthetic interest is disinterested. We love beauty simply because it is beautiful, not for practical gain. However, self-contained villainy, love of evil for its own sake, does not exist, according to Kant. Evil deeds are driven by egoism, a subjective interest that diverges from the objective moral law established by reason. Thus, evil becomes a means to achieve a goal. For instance, a person might steal something they desire, disregarding general norms. At first glance, this utilitarian, pragmatic interpretation does not account for situations where evil seems to be committed out of pure, unadulterated malice. For example, the characters in the Marquis de Sade's works commit maniacal murders and practice other forms of cruelty. But can it be said that such acts stem from a desire to do something horrific simply because it is bad? I could not believe, until I saw it myself, that there exist such monsters in human form who are ready to kill for the pleasure that killing brings them. They gain no benefit from it, harbor no enmity toward their victims, and act only to enjoy a spectacle that is pleasing to them. Nevertheless, if we assume that de Sade's libertine serves pure evil, we must inevitably acknowledge the presence of good in his universe. For the characters of this writer, the monstrous acts they commit are undoubtedly good because they bring them pleasure. This view is held, for instance, by contemporary thinker Lars Svensson, who, in his book A Philosophy of Evil, calls de Sade's heroes simple hedonists, albeit with highly specific tastes. In this sense, evil becomes a means, and the sadist merely indulges their own egoistic interests. However, Georges Bataille argues that genuine, disinterested evil does exist and manifests in acts that strive for extremity. Benefit and pleasure are not the same, as the latter has a more complex nature. Indeed, what would pleasure be if the anxiety associated with it did not reveal its paradoxical character? If, in the eyes of the one experiencing it, it were not unbearable? The pursuit of destruction, in this case, is seen as an extreme thirst for annihilation, which reduces even its own resources to ashes, containing as much pleasure as suffering. Thus, the phenomena in question are evaluative and relative in nature. Friedrich Nietzsche denied the possibility of absolute evil and suggested that human actions are driven by the will to power. More accurately, there is no force that drives someone. According to Nietzsche, all existence, including every actor, is a manifestation of the will, and all subjects are merely bastards foisted upon philosophy. If a sadist finds personal good in their behavior, a fanatical idealist might justify the destruction of a social group deemed evil from a moral standpoint. Typically, the other is either objectified and reduced to the status of a thing, or endowed with inherently non-human qualities that justify violence against them. This creates an opposition between the good us and the bad them. Historically, the measure of evil has been the moral law. A person acts either contrary to it, I know stealing is wrong, but I steal because I have nothing to eat, or in accordance with it, I kill these people because they deserve such punishment. In the first case, evil is a means to achieve a goal, whether egoistic or for the common good. In the second, it is not considered evil at all. For example, the adversary appears as the negative figure. However, Hannah Arendt identifies another type, banal evil, committed through thoughtlessness. The horrors of World War II not only shattered many people's faith in progress, but also revealed a type of atrocity devoid of any demonic quality. In 1961, the trial of Adolf Eichmann, former head of the department responsible for the final solution to the Jewish question, took place. Arendt covered the trial as a correspondent. In her book Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil, she notes that Eichmann was neither a psychopath nor a sadist, and harbored no hatred for the inferior race, but was simply doing his job. This allowed him to feel no remorse as he was obeying the existing law. This legal moral paradox is a topic for separate discussion. Speaking of evil stupidity, Arendt emphasizes that the bureaucrat Eichmann did not even consider what he was doing or what was happening in the camps. Explaining a world without a shared transcendent foundation, Kant described the subject's cognitive task as active, not contemplative. Morality, in his view, exists through reason, but what happens if reason is dull or not engaged at all? Arendt's banality of evil is the absence of mental effort. Just as in Kant's philosophy, the faculty of aesthetic judgment operates, a person, through reflection, can refrain from evil. Evil in modernity, on the one hand, today, evil is perceived as an almost outdated, mythological category, especially since postmodern relativity leaves little room for definitive judgments about good and bad. The boundaries of the concept blur, and it becomes entangled in a host of complex ethical issues, such as abortion, euthanasia, animal exploitation, and so forth. On the other hand, this phenomenon periodically reveals itself in catastrophes, prompting society to recall it unanimously. On September 11, 2001, George W. Bush declared, "Today, our nation saw evil." The tragedy activated what Kant called the common sense. Americans and people from other countries felt, in a unified impulse, that something horrific and irreparable had occurred. The portrayal of terrorism as infernal, inhuman evil fits well with notions of the demonic. However, we are dealing with people whose value systems are based on certain ideals, disastrous for others. Meanwhile, belief in demonic evil leads to the dehumanization of the opponent, portraying them as a kind of dark entity, and whether such an entity can be judged by human laws is not a rhetorical question. The idea of confronting evil, deeply embedded in Western culture, manifests in mass art. No epic blockbuster or young adult literature work is complete without a figure of global dark force that the heroes must defeat. Evil serves as a dramaturgical and compositional backbone, creating conflict. Characters gain the opportunity to perform heroic deeds, introducing a dimension of heroism often associated with the aesthetic category of the sublime. Leibniz explained catastrophes in the Best of Worlds as opportunities for humans to demonstrate virtues such as selflessness and valor. These qualities can only be exercised against an unequivocally negative opponent, the source of terrible woes. Confrontations between different social groups raise many uncomfortable questions. As in real politics, each side defends its interests. Thus, in films and books, the bad guys are often monsters from other dimensions, zombies, or machines. For instance, when Voldemort in Harry Potter loses his human traits, external metamorphoses signal to the audience that his soul has been irreparably disfigured by dark magic. In line with Christian notions of the unrepentant sinner, he deprives himself of the possibility of salvation. Yet evil can also be alluring. Once a free-spirited and defiant Satan, from John Milton's Paradise Lost, became an attractive figure. William Blake dedicated lines to the tiger in whose eyes burns what Georges Bataille calls the light of villainy, and Lautréamont described the tormented demon Maldoror, who found malice equal to his own only in a shark, and consummated a union with it. Once again, a contentious question arises. Is this a matter of evil for the sake of evil, or does the inhuman in Romanticism represent a way to touch something entirely other, something that lies beyond the profane world, on the far side of binary moral oppositions? Today, mass culture in creating images of villains partly inherits the romantic problematic, albeit in a simplified, reduced form. Negative characters gather fan clubs because their delinquent behavior is rooted in the exceptionalism of the misunderstood anti-hero who stands in opposition to society. In the case of charming rogues, evil is more of a metaphor, and flirting with the inhuman does not go so far as to deprive the audience of empathy. When symbols of threat become demonic characters from films and the abundance of news about tragic events dulls sensations, turning real catastrophes into mere media content, many are tempted to regard even ideological opponents on the internet as pure evil. Often, simple disagreement with an opponent leads to inflammatory statements, every opposition becomes political, and the newfound enemy is stripped of human status. Ironically, this frequently occurs during debates about the best way to organize society, one where everyone would be comfortable, a world without evil.